Hello everyone. Hope you are doing well and you have watched our first part of working capital. If you haven't, please watch the first part playlist and come back here. Now moving forward, everything we have covered so far applies to any business, mature or early stage. Now let's talk about why an early stage startup needs a genuinely different mental model. Four differences that matter enormously. 1. Your scarce resource is runway, not return on capital. A mature company optimizes working capital to squeeze out the last percentage point of return on capital employed. You are optimizing working capital to buy yourself months of runway between funding rounds. That's a completely different objective function, and it should drive completely different decisions. 2. Your billing model can create structurally negative NWC, and this is genuinely one of the great strategic advantages available to a startup. If you can bill annually upfront while your competitors bill monthly, you've handed yourself a real capital advantage, one that compounds as you scale. 3. You have limited access to traditional financing. No bank is extending you an asset-based lending facility at seed stage. So your working capital swings have to be funded either by the equity you just raised or by specialized tools, venture debt, factoring, inventory finance. I worked on a fintech NBFC pitch where the founders were scaling their loan disbursements aggressively, funded almost entirely of the last equity round, without realizing they were essentially using 20 times valuation equity capital to fund what should have been debt financed working capital. That's an expensive mistake and a very common one in lending businesses specifically, because in a lending business, your loan book is your inventory. 4. And this is the one that genuinely surprises most founders. Growth itself consumes working capital. This is the killer nobody warns you about. When you go from 10 crore to 20 crore in ARR, you don't just need more people and more marketing spend. You need more receivables outstanding, more inventory sitting on shelves. That incremental NWC requirement is a real cash need. And if you miss it in your financial plan, you get forced into a bridge round, usually on terms you don't like, at a time you didn't choose. I've seen this exact pattern in a D2C e-commerce pitch, where a founder proudly projected a doubling of revenue without once modeling the additional inventory cash outlay that growth required. By the time the deck reached me for review, the quietly missing number was almost 40% of the total raise ask. This slide for me is the critical mindset moment of the entire session. So let's slow down here. You'll read an annual report from a company like Amazon or ITC and see them boasting about a negative cash conversion cycle or a DPO of 80 days and think, great, that's the goal, let me copy that. It is not the goal for you, not yet, and maybe not for years. Amazon has decades of accumulated supplier leverage. You don't. If you try to force net 90 payment terms onto your suppliers as a Series A company, one of two things happens. They simply refuse, or worse, they quietly deprioritize your orders when supply gets tight. So look at this comparison honestly. On the left is what your finance function is actually doing today. Optimizing for runway, financed by your last equity raise, watched closely by your founders, your CFO if you have one, and your board. On the right is what you might eventually become, but the playbook to get there is entirely different. Your job for the next 2 to 3 years is to deliberately engineer your way to the right-hand column through smart billing design and the right financing tools, not to copy behaviors you haven't yet earned the leverage to sustain. I'll leave you with a question I like to ask founders in this exact moment of a diligence call. Which of these rows, honestly, is hurting you the most right now? Sit with that question before you move to the next section, because your answer usually points directly at your next quarter's priority.